Claims and Sustains, a SCIFAR government contracts podcast. I'm Amy Hoang.
And I'm Teddie Arnold, and today we're going to dive into the, quote, revolutionary FAR overhaul, which is very interesting. There's a lot of folks out there who think the FAR is simply too long, procurement is too onerous, takes too much time, and so there's an effort underway to essentially simplify and expedite procurement vis-a-vis a FAR rewrite, which would in fact be revolutionary, I think, if that actually is the finished product, which we will see what happens with that. But do you want to talk about the background of the sort of what initiated this whole project?
Sure, yeah, let's start at the top. In April 2025, the White House issued Executive Order 14275 called Restoring Common Sense to Federal Procurement, which brings us to the revolutionary FAR overhaul. The idea is that the FAR is going to be rewritten, and it's going to be skinnied down to essentially only include provisions that are required by statute or provisions that are essential to efficient and cost-effective procurement. That second part is doing a lot because we've gotten indications from the government that this really isn't just going to be provisions that are required by statute, that you are going to need quite a few provisions for efficient and effective procurement. So I think we're going to see more than just statutory provisions. There's also something interesting about a sunsetting provision. So the idea is after 4 years, all of the non-statutory provisions that do make it into this skinny down FAR are going to be sunset unless they are re-included at that time. So we could see a ever-changing FAR, I guess, whereas before we had something that was pretty static. So interesting to see, but Teddy, how is this actually going to work?
All right, so let's talk about how the sausage is going to get made. So there's really a two-track approach here. Track one sort of involves dealing with the contents of the FAR as it is today. Track two really involves taking stuff out of the FAR and putting it elsewhere. I'll talk about track one briefly. So there's going to be a formal FAR process like you would be familiar with, a notice and comment period, and then there'd be a final rule issued. But preceding that, the FAR Council is issuing deviations for specific parts of the FAR, for all the parts of the FAR. And it's essentially model deviations that the agencies are then strongly encouraged to adopt. If the agency wants to deviate from that, they've got to go back to the FAR Council, they've got to ask permission to do that. The deviations are subject to informal public comment, and the deadline for the first round covering the deviations that we've seen so far, parts 1, 10, and 34, which I'll talk about a little later, the deadline for that is September 30th. The kicker here is that the executive order tasks the FAR Council with accomplishing all of this in 180 days. Pretty ambitious, not sure that's actually going to happen. A lot of people don't think that's going to happen or don't think that's realistic or even really a good idea because, this stuff takes time.
Well, particularly since that September 30th deadline for the initial comments is about 30 days before that entire 180 days expires.
They just got to start hustling, just got to put in overtime really is what you got to do. Do you want to talk about track two?
Sure. So track two is in addition to the actual skinny down FAR we're going to have. We're also going to have something called agency buying guides. So the idea is the FAR is going to tell agencies what they have to do. It's not going to tell them how they have to do it. But OFPPP is going to provide guidance to the agency in the form of these buying guides. And the idea is that these are going to be non-regulatory agency guidance that are going to help guide agencies on how they actually perform procurements. So, Teddy, you might be familiar with something called the DoD Procedures, Guidance, and Information, the DoD PGI. Mm-hmm. This is a process that already exists when agencies went through a process to skinny down the DFARS. The idea was to put only kind of what is essential in the DFARS and then move other things into this DoD PGI. And I think we're going to get something similar here. And I can understand the concept. As a procurement attorney, to me, this means that instead of going to one source to find everything an agency might be doing to run a procurement, I'm now going to have the FAR on one screen and the relevant agency buying guide on another screen.
It does make you wonder, if the whole goal here is efficiency, is what you just outlined and actually an efficient process? It sounds like it's actually less efficient than what we currently have.
Well, Teddy, I don't know if you've ever seen 101 Dalmatians 2, Patch's London Adventure, but it would lend credence to the idea that this sequel is not always better than the original.
All right,
So
I'll have to fire that one up on Netflix later on.
yeah, we'll see. But okay, so that's kind of how the buying guides are going to work. But do you want to talk to us about what has happened thus far in the FAR revolutionary overhaul?
Yeah, so not a lot. I think it's been a bit of a teaser at this point. We're still waiting for the really meat of the deviations to drop. Right now, we've seen deviations issued for parts 1, 10, and 34. Part 1 being the FAR system itself, setting forth a lot of the policy goals of the FAR, a lot of the definitions, and sort of like a preview of what is to come, a lot of instructions to contracting officers. Part 10 being market research, which I think is important. I mean, they're all important. Part 34, major systems acquisition. These just aren't really the parts of the FAR that folks are really engaging with on a day-to-day basis, not like parts 14, 15, and 16, part 19, small business. I mean, there's a bunch of parts I could think of that come to mind that would be eagerly awaiting what those deviations will actually look like. So if you take part 1, I mean, there's some interesting tidbits in what's been issued so far. Part 1, for instance, confirms that not all future revisions are going to go through notice and comment rulemaking, which I think is significant, and then also it reaffirms the 4-year sunset period for non-statutory provisions unless they want to re-up those. So it's sort of a trial period to see how that actually works in practice. Conversely, if you look at part 10, market research, it sort of removes, it eliminates a lot of provisions, and then it builds back in some provisions regarding simplified market research, and some new verbiage on industry engagement, stuff like that. But ultimately, I think what really remains to be seen is how are sort of like the really critical parts of the FAR going to be addressed. Do you want to talk about what this means for industry?
Yeah, at least what we know it means thus far, which is maybe not a ton, but I would say for our industry partners at this point, make sure that you are actually tracking these deviations. There is a Revolutionary FAR Overhaul website. It has a lined out version of each part of the FAR that has already gone through the deviation process, though I will note that lined out version tells you what has been eliminated. It doesn't tell you what's been added, so you would actually need to figure that out for yourself. But watch for the deviations. As Teddy mentioned, there's this deviation process. We're probably going to see agencies starting to adopt those deviations potentially by late June. So start looking for new parts 1, 10, and 34, potentially starting in June. And then take advantage of this informal comment period. So if you do have thoughts on the existing parts that have already gone through the deviation or future parts, make sure you're taking advantage of this informal comment period. And that's about all we've got for now. We'll just stay tuned to see what else unfolds.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe one of the more interesting aspects to watch will be with regard to the clauses, the Part 52 clauses and 53 provisions. Makes up about 30% of the FAR. I think the FAR is something like 2,000 pages. That's why it's become a target for this big onerous bulk of rules. But the standardized clauses are there to create a standardized set of rules that all agencies are following, and contractors have certainty in terms of the risk allocation. So it'll be fascinating to watch whether or not agencies are pursuing deviations that then create inconsistencies between agencies as to how clauses are utilized. So a lot of really interesting stuff on the horizon. I don't know that hunting for stuff to delete is really going to be the optimal outcome here, but hopefully they'll take the opportunity to at least clarify a lot of the ambiguities that have evolved in case law over the years. So
there's a place for you to submit your informal comments, Teddy, and it's not through the podcast.
Until then,
that's all we have.
Thanks
for tuning in.